The idea that Russia and China are arming Iran amid waves of domestic protests must be approached with analytical discipline rather than rhetorical excess. The concept of arming, in this context, does not primarily refer to the shipment of rifles or tanks into Iranian territory. It refers instead to the transfer of systems, doctrines, and technological capabilities that allow a state under internal pressure to survive, adapt, and reassert control. In the 21st century, regimes do not fall or survive solely on firepower. They fall or survive on information control, command resilience, surveillance architecture, and the ability to dominate both physical and digital space simultaneously. Iran, in 2026, represents a textbook case of this transformation. The Islamic Republic is not facing a conventional insurgency. It is confronting a diffuse, networked, socially embedded protest dynamic driven by economic exhaustion, generational fracture, and long-standing political grievances. These movements do not attempt to seize territory. They attempt to seize narrative, legitimacy, and coordination. In response, the Iranian state does not need more soldiers. It needs better sensors, better data fusion, better electronic warfare, and better insulation from external pressure. This is precisely where Russian and Chinese strategic assistance becomes relevant. Russia and China approach Iran not as a client state in the traditional sense, but as a node in a broader contest against Western leverage. For Moscow, Iran represents a critical partner in the long-term struggle against what it perceives as Western-led regime engineering, sanctions warfare, and information dominance. For Beijing, Iran is both a strategic energy partner and a testing ground for doctrines of digital sovereignty, internal stability, and non-Western governance models. Their involvement is therefore not tactical, but structural. From the Russian perspective, recent years have accelerated a doctrinal convergence between external war and internal control. Russia's own experience with sanctions, internal dissent, cyber pressure, and information warfare has reshaped its understanding of regime security. Moscow has learned that survival under pressure requires resilience across multiple domains: military deterrence, economic insulation, information control, and psychological dominance. The transfer of this experience to Iran does not necessarily take the form of direct weapon deliveries. It takes the form of expertise, training, and systems integration. One element frequently discussed in analytical circles is Russia's emphasis on strategic deterrence systems designed not only for external signaling but for internal regime stability. Advanced missile programs, including experimental platforms associated with next-generation strike capabilities, serve a dual function. Externally, they reinforce deterrence by signaling escalation dominance. Internally, they project regime strength and inevitability. Even when such systems are not operationally deployed, their symbolic role matters. They communicate to both domestic and foreign audiences that the state remains technologically sovereign and strategically untouchable. In parallel, Russia's deep experience in electronic warfare plays a critical role. Modern protest movements rely on coordination, encrypted messaging, GPS navigation, mobile data networks, and real-time video dissemination. Russian doctrine places heavy emphasis on degrading these capabilities through jamming, spoofing, signal interception, and selective network disruption. Assistance in this domain allows Iranian security forces to fragment protest movements without resorting to indiscriminate violence, which carries higher political costs. China's contribution operates on a different axis. Where Russia brings coercive resilience, China brings systemic control. Over the past decade, Beijing has refined an internal security model based on data integration, predictive governance, and algorithmic surveillance. This model does not merely react to unrest, it seeks to preempt it. The export of Chinese surveillance technologies, smart city platforms, facial recognition systems, and telecommunications infrastructure has already reshaped governance practices across parts of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In the Iranian case, Chinese involvement is best understood through the lens of digital sovereignty. China does not frame its assistance as repression. It frames it as stability, modernization, and protection against foreign interference. Satellite cooperation, for example, allows states to reduce dependence on Western-controlled imagery, navigation, and communications. Access to alternative satellite constellations enhances resilience against sanctions, surveillance, and potential disruptions imposed by adversaries. Electronic monitoring of territory, crowd movement analysis, biometric databases, and AI-assisted behavioral pattern recognition form the backbone of this approach. These systems do not require constant visible force. They operate quietly, shaping behavior by increasing the perceived cost of dissent and reducing the ability of movements to scale. In this sense, technology becomes a form of soft coercion, embedded into daily life rather than imposed through overt repression. Crucially, neither Russia nor China needs Iran to win decisively against its protest movements. They need the Iranian state to endure. Endurance itself becomes a strategic victory. Each failed uprising reinforces the narrative that Western-backed pressure campaigns cannot reliably produce regime change. Each year of survival under sanctions and unrest strengthens the argument for alternative governance models insulated from liberal democratic norms. This convergence of interests explains why assistance is often indirect, deniable, and framed as civilian or dual-use cooperation. Satellite launches are justified as scientific collaboration. Telecommunications infrastructure is framed as development. Cybersecurity cooperation is framed as protection against foreign hacking. Yet in aggregate, these elements form a coherent architecture of regime defense. The informational dimension is equally important. Russia and China both contribute to narrative framing. Russian media ecosystems amplify interpretations of Iranian protests as externally manipulated, economically destabilizing, or culturally corrosive. Chinese discourse emphasizes order, sovereignty, and the dangers of chaos. Together, these narratives provide ideological reinforcement that legitimizes state action domestically and diplomatically. The implications extend far beyond Iran. What is being tested is a model of authoritarian resilience adapted to the age of network dissent. Instead of relying on mass repression, the state leverages technology to fragment opposition, control tempo, and shape perception. Violence becomes selective rather than systemic. Visibility replaces brutality as the primary deterrent. For Western observers, this creates an analytical blind spot. Traditional metrics of repression, arrests, casualties, troop deployments, fail to capture the true dynamics of control. A protest movement can appear large yet strategically impotent if its communication channels are disrupted, its leadership isolated, and its narratives drowned out. The battlefield is no longer the street alone. It is the spectrum, the server, the satellite, and the algorithm. Russia and China are not exporting ideology in the classical sense. They are exporting methods. These methods do not require loyalty to Moscow or Beijing. They require alignment on one principle. Regime survival takes precedence over liberal legitimacy. Iran, facing internal pressure and external hostility, is a natural recipient of this approach. The longer-term consequence is the normalization of a new equilibrium. Protest movements will continue to emerge, driven by genuine grievances. But their capacity to translate mobilization into political transformation will increasingly depend on access to technological asymmetries. Where the state controls data, networks, and visibility, dissent becomes manageable rather than existential. This does not mean unrest disappears. It means it becomes cyclical, contained, and strategically neutralized. For Iran, Russian and Chinese assistance does not guarantee stability. It guarantees time. Time to adapt, time to recalibrate economic policy, time to negotiate from a position of endurance rather than desperation. From a global perspective, this represents a profound shift. The contest over Iran is no longer primarily about nuclear thresholds or regional proxy wars. It is about whether a state under sustained pressure can integrate 21st century control systems faster than opposition movements can innovate around them. Russia and China are betting that it can. If they are correct, Iran 2026 will not be remembered as the year of collapse, but as a case study in how internal unrest was absorbed into a broader architecture of technological sovereignty. A warning, not only to Western policymakers, but to any movement that assumes visibility alone is power. In this emerging order, power belongs less to those who mobilize crowds than to those who control systems. And it is precisely in the control of systems that Moscow and Beijing have chosen to invest their influence.